Why the right cannot win. It's time for some sober reflection on the situation of the right. Um, we are out there battling, for the most part, not in the streets, but in the ballot boxes, in the stores, in the churches, in the schools. I'm not going to be critical here and say the effort hasn't been strong enough. Obviously, the point of the video is that the tactics we are using are insufficient. Whether we want to say this is because we're not awoke, whether we're passive, whether we're complicit, or what the problem is in this regard, is to some degree beside the point. The point is that the right is losing, and what this video is saying is that we cannot win. So yes, the efforts have been rather muted against the left's incursions, but this quite possibly could be attributed to the inability of the right to actually win the conflict. I'm not saying it's not impossible with certain conditions, qualifications, but winning within the parameters of this system is logically and technically impossible. The dice are loaded against us. The school system, the educational system, the church even, the political system, the economic system, the culture itself is all going left. And while the right or the conservative parties are winning elections, Trump being the notable example of this, and an anomaly to some degree, the right is shifting left, the left is shifting left, and we're winning by becoming more centrist. Now, the reason why this is so is tied up within the parameters of the fight that we're engaged in. If we have a fight in which we're all on one side, the one side can't win, even though they might think they're battling against the forces of evil, for example. If they're using the same tactics, the same methodologies, and the same paradigms that the left is losing, or the evil side is using, they're not really going to win. They can't win. The cards are stacked against them because they're not defined by any factors that would lead them into a different direction. But let's get this down to a more clear and concise configuration here, and define the right and left, or what I mean by the right and left. Because unfortunately, what people define as the right is often part of the left, and the left is often defined so aggressively that it makes the right look a little more right, but it really is just two variations on the left. And this is why we got the drift to the left. The key feature of a left-leaning political or economic system or idea is that it externalizes cost. Socialism or communism is taking costs from one sector and transferring them to the other. This usually entails a victim group being identified or self-identifying, and an oppressor group. The oppressor group is always the right to some degree, and in some way the oppressors are always on the right. And to be honest, it's generally or often is narrowed down to white old rich men, because these generally represent the right to the greatest degree. They are also the defenders of the right culture of Christian values. Not that I'm denigrating any other group, because in this world it's very important to make sure we are encompassing everybody so feelings are not hurt. But the focus of the left is always on the destruction of the white older male. But be that as it may, the point is that the vast majority of the culture is on the left, and this includes the vast majority of white older males. And this is one of the problems that we have, is that we're being destroyed as the right while manifesting many of the values of the left. And again, we have to be clear on what the left and the right is. The left identifies victims and oppressors and creates a social agenda legitimized by the idea of social justice and social equality, and it takes from the oppressing group and transfers to the victim group. Now this might sound familiar in a vague kind of way, because this is what democracy does. It's what democracy legitimizes. Democracy, defined as the power of the people, is really the power of the majority, and the power of the majority becomes a tyranny of the majority, because whatever the majority feels is justified, they have the power and the legitimacy to implement. This raw power has been moderated somewhat in the form of representative democracy, and in this kind of democracy, the majority gets to vote in a government, and the government supposedly representing all the population, all the citizenry, including the non-voter and the voter that voted for some other party. But the only response a government has is to take from Peter to pay Paul, to take from a group that has what society kind of feels is unjustified wealth, and take a portion of this and redistribute it to the needy, to the deserving poor. So no matter how you slice it, democracy ends up as socialism. It's unavoidable, because the government itself must always tax. It must always extract wealth from one group to pay another, ergo itself. And then all of its programs and policies consist of identifying a social need, being socialism, and implementing that need through a program of taking resources from the ones with unjustified wealth that is in excess of what is justified, and allocating it to a social good for the needy and the deserving poor. And while the rich and the tax-paying public to some degree benefit, there's a disconnect between the paying and the receiving, and the point is that the government is extracting wealth to implement some kind of social good. This is socialism, no matter how you slice it. So democracy, engaging in democracy, is engaging in socialism. But there is still one other big problem we face, and that is capitalism. Now, capitalism is pretty much universally considered a right-leaning institution. But think of it. Without the government's support and legitimacy, even for private enterprise and private property, and by private property I'm talking commercial property, capitalism couldn't exist long, because the minority of property owners would be stripped of their wealth. There would be mass uprisings and looting. The minute, if the government, for whatever reason, vanished or was abolished or could no longer function, riots would soon emerge, and private property would vanish. And I mean, we're always kind of verging on this in some areas as it is. Democracy holds this kind of anarchy in place, but let's be clear, capitalism is not without social costs. It needs the support of the government. It needs a legitimizing function of the government. It needs the government protection. And libertarians, who are considered to be on the far right because they favor small government, as meritorious as that might be, the point is, their idea of small government is a very strong government that defends them, but does nothing else. So it's debatable whether they are really for a small government. What they're really after, I mean, if we're going to be honest here, is a government that is small for everybody else and very large, very active, very dynamic, very intrusive so far as their own rights and needs are concerned. They want to run, by them I mean libertarians, they want to run roughshod over everybody else. They want a planet which is totally open to them, and this is free trade. Libertarians want all borders gone, all restrictions gone, all hindrances gone to their economic freedom. this is liberalism, liberty, libertarianism. It's all one package. And libertarianism is just liberalism wrapped up in a economic package. So then this brings us to the question, well, what does the right have if the economics, capitalism and communism, are on the left, and if democracy and fascism and tyranny are all on the left? What is there on the right? What is there that pays its own way? Because this is the key feature that defines the right. We are trying to be self-reliant. We're trying to pay our own way and help others as well, but we want to do it on our own terms. The only institution we have, and we've lost that to a large extent, is the church. And the church is composed of people who look at the beam in their own eye rather than the straw in the eyes of others. We work through our own error and our own faults and try to repair, fix, and overcome these. We're not trying to remake society through a top-down process, which is why we're losing, because the left works from the top down, and they get the power of the government and they get the power of the media and capture the power of all the institutions, and they oppress the right, and the right is on the bottom trying to earn a living. And so it's through the church that the right has to work. And the church is actually a social system, and this is where the right again has been defeated. We've allowed the church to become some kind of social club, and charity is just a giving of a small amount of our surplus, because the vast majority goes to taxes and so on already. We have to remake the church in terms of what the Bible describes. The church is not the left's idea of a church, and it's because the left has actually dominated the church organization, why it's slowly trying to shift the church to the left. And it has done this by the very structure of the church and the breaking up of the denominations and the local church and so on. The ecumenical movement is in disarray because it's all trying to be done from the top. Each group trying to gain absolute power over all the other groups. But the ecumenical movement must come from the roots. It has to come from the bottom. And it's going to take a total remaking and a re-strategizing of the church elements, the church members. And we have videos on this, and I encourage you to look at them.